February 14th, 1945. The frozen forests of eastern Belgium stretched endlessly under a grey winter sky, snow crunching beneath the boots of American soldiers as they advanced through the Ardennes. Private First Class. Marcus Washington, barely 18 years old, stood hunched over a field kitchen that billowed steam into the bitter air, his dark hands working methodically through pounds of flour, water, and whatever rations he could scrounge to feed 300 hungry men of the 761st Tank Battalion. The young cook from Detroit had never imagined that his grandmother's lessons about making biscuits from scratch would become the foundation for one of the most extraordinary episodes of ingenuity in military history. What the German armored division approaching through the tree line that morning could never have anticipated was that their most formidable Tiger tank would meet its match not through superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but through the resourcefulness of a teenager who understood chemistry better than most engineers. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. In the next 6 hours, Marcus Washington would transform from an overlooked support soldier into a legend whose impossible victory would redefine how military strategists thought about unconventional warfare, proving that sometimes the greatest weapons are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to see possibilities where others see only ingredients. The morning had begun like any other for the 761st Tank Battalion, one of the few all-African-American armored units fighting in the European theater. Stationed in a temporary camp carved out of the Belgian wilderness, the battalion represented more than just military might. They embodied the determination of nearly 1 million African-American men and women who served during the conflict, despite facing discrimination both at home and abroad. Marcus Washington had joined their ranks not as a tanker or infantryman, but as a cook assigned to the Quartermaster Corps, where his job was to keep bellies full and morale high. The young man from Detroit's East Side had grown up in a household where his grandmother, Clara Washington, ruled the kitchen with an iron fist and an encyclopedic knowledge of how ingredients behaved under different conditions. She had taught him that cooking was really just chemistry applied to feeding people, that understanding how flour proteins developed, how fats rendered, and how heat transferred through different materials could mean the difference between a meal that sustained and one that merely filled space. These lessons, absorbed over countless hours, helping prepare Sunday dinners for their extended family, would prove far more valuable than anyone could have imagined. The 761st had arrived in Belgium 3 weeks earlier as part of the Allied push to eliminate the last German resistance following the Battle of the Bulge. Their complement included 36 M4 Sherman tanks, each weighing 32 tons and armed with a 75mm main gun, along with supporting vehicles, and nearly 700 personnel. The battalion's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, had served with distinction in North Africa and Sicily, earning his men's respect through his willingness to fight alongside them rather than direct from behind the lines. Marcus had been assigned to the unit after completing his training at Fort Knox, where his culinary skills quickly earned him recognition. Despite the military's official segregation policies, hunger was a universal equalizer, and word of the young cook's ability to transform basic rations into something approaching decent food had spread throughout the camp. He possessed an intuitive understanding of how to stretch limited ingredients, how to coax flavor from the most basic components, and perhaps most importantly, how to improvise when supplies ran short. The German forces they faced in Belgium represented the last gasps of a once mighty war machine. The armored division approaching their position included several Tiger tanks, each one a mechanical monster, weighing 57 tons and armed with an 88mm cannon, capable of penetrating any Allied armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. These vehicles had terrorized Allied forces across multiple theaters, their thick frontal armor measuring up to 100 millimeters in thickness, effectively immune to most American anti-tank weapons when engaged from the front. But the German military of that era was running critically short of everything that mattered: fuel, ammunition, experienced crews, and time. The Tiger approaching Marcus's position that February morning was part of a desperate probe seeking weak points in the Allied lines, hoping to delay the inevitable advance toward Germany's industrial heartland. Its crew consisted of 5 men who had been fighting for nearly 4 years, their tank bearing the scars of countless engagements across Russia, France, and now Belgium. Marcus had risen before dawn, as was his custom, to begin preparations for the morning meal. The field kitchen occupied a small clearing approximately 200 meters behind the main defensive line, positioned to take advantage of natural windbreaks while remaining close enough to the fighting positions to deliver hot food efficiently. His equipment was basic but functional. Several large pots capable of holding 15 gallons each, a field stove that burned whatever fuel could be procured, and an assortment of utensils that had seen better days. The young cook took pride in his work, understanding that good food represented far more than mere sustenance for men facing combat. A hot meal meant connection to home, a reminder of humanity in the midst of mechanized destruction, and most practically, the energy needed to operate effectively in brutal conditions. He had learned to prepare meals that would stick to a man's ribs during long, cold watches, food that could be eaten quickly when time was short, and rations that traveled well when units had to move rapidly. His current challenge involved feeding 300 men, using supplies that had been calculated for perhaps 200. Recent supply difficulties meant that standard rations were running low, forcing Marcus to become increasingly creative with available ingredients. He had managed to acquire several hundred pounds of flour from a Belgian mill, along with lard, salt, and basic seasonings, but protein sources remained scarce. The young man had been experimenting with ways to create filling, nutritious meals from these limited components. The flour itself represented an interesting puzzle. Unlike the processed uniform product available in American stores, this Belgian flour retained more of its natural characteristics. It contained higher protein levels, giving it different binding properties when mixed with liquids and heated. Marcus had noticed these qualities during his experiments with field bread, observing how the flour behaved differently under various conditions of moisture, temperature, and pressure. As he worked that morning, mixing large batches of dough for what would become breakfast biscuits, Marcus became aware of unusual activity along the defensive perimeter. Radio chatter had increased significantly, and he could see officers moving between positions with the kind of urgency that suggested incoming trouble. His battalion's Shermans had moved to hull-down positions along the ridgeline, their crews performing final checks on weapons and equipment. The first indication of serious enemy contact came as a distant rumble echoing through the forest, the unmistakable sound of tracked vehicles moving through underbrush. Marcus paused in his work, listening carefully as the sound grew closer and more distinct. Years of living near Detroit's automotive plants had given him an ear for engines, and what he heard approaching carried the deeper, more powerful note of German armor, rather than the higher-pitched whine of American vehicles. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison appeared at the field kitchen shortly before 7 in the morning, his expression grim as he surveyed the tactical situation. The commanding officer had received reports of a German probe developing along multiple avenues of approach, with at least one heavy tank confirmed among the enemy forces. His defensive plan relied on using the terrain to force approaching vehicles into predetermined killing zones, where his Shermans could engage from concealed positions. "Washington," Morrison called, catching the young cook's attention. "How long before breakfast is ready? I need these men fed and ready to move on short notice." Marcus looked up from his work, flour dusting his hands and forearms. "Give me another hour, sir. I'm working on enough biscuits to feed everyone, plus some extra in case we need to travel light." The colonel nodded, appreciating the cook's foresight. In fluid situations like this, the ability to carry food that wouldn't spoil quickly could make the difference between maintaining combat effectiveness and facing hungry, demoralized troops. He was about to continue his rounds when the distinctive crack of an 88mm gun echoed across the valley, followed immediately by the sound of the shell impacting somewhere near the forward positions. Both men instinctively ducked as more shots followed, the sound growing closer with each impact. Radio reports began flooding in from the defensive line. Enemy armor in sight, at least one Tiger tank confirmed. Request for immediate artillery support. Morrison grabbed his radio handset to coordinate the response, while Marcus continued working with the steady calm that characterized his approach to everything. whether cooking under pressure or dealing with incoming enemy fire. The tactical situation developed rapidly over the next hour. German forces had indeed launched a probing attack along a 3-kilometer front, seeking to identify weak points in the Allied defensive line. Their spearhead included the Tiger tank that Marcus had heard approaching, supported by infantry and lighter armor. The German commander's plan was straightforward: use the Tiger's superior firepower and armor protection to punch through the American positions, then exploit the breakthrough with follow-on forces. What the German forces had not anticipated was the determination and tactical skill of the 761st Tank Battalion. Despite facing discrimination and skepticism from some quarters of the military establishment, these men had proven themselves repeatedly in combat. Their crews knew their equipment intimately, understood how to use terrain to their advantage, and possessed the kind of unit cohesion that comes from fighting together through multiple engagements. The Tiger tank approaching their position represented both a significant threat and a valuable opportunity. If destroyed, it would eliminate the most dangerous component of the German attack, while potentially providing intelligence about enemy capabilities and intentions. If allowed to operate freely, it could devastate the American defensive positions and create the breakthrough that German forces desperately needed. Sherman tank crews understood their vehicles' limitations when facing Tiger tanks. The American tanks' 75mm guns could penetrate Tiger armor only under specific conditions: close-range engagements against side or rear armor, or lucky shots that struck weak points in the frontal protection. This reality had forced American forces to develop tactics based on mobility, coordination, and the willingness to accept casualties in order to achieve firing positions that offered a reasonable chance of success. Marcus continued his cooking preparations as the battle developed around him, but his attention increasingly focused on the tactical situation rather than the routine tasks at hand. He could hear the distinctive sound of the Tiger's main gun firing at regular intervals, each shot followed by radio reports of near misses or impacts on American positions. The German crew was methodically working through target priorities, seeking to eliminate the most dangerous threats while remaining at range where their armor provided maximum protection. The young cook's understanding of the situation was shaped by his practical experience with the battalion's equipment and personnel. He knew that their Sherman tanks carried approximately 60 rounds of main gun ammunition, divided between armor-piercing and high-explosive shells. He understood the fuel consumption rates of their vehicles, the mechanical reliability issues that plagued certain systems, and most importantly, the limitations imposed by their current tactical position. As he worked, Marcus found himself thinking about the Tiger tank in terms that had nothing to do with conventional military analysis. His grandmother's lessons about understanding how different materials behaved under stress, how chemical reactions could be controlled and directed, and how seemingly simple ingredients could be combined to create powerful effects, began to suggest possibilities that had nothing to do with traditional weapons. The flour he was working with represented hundreds of pounds of potential energy stored in chemical form. When mixed with air and subjected to the right kind of ignition source, flour could explode with tremendous force. This was not theoretical knowledge. Grain elevator explosions had been a recurring problem in agricultural areas for decades, the result of flour dust reaching critical concentrations in enclosed spaces before encountering a spark or open flame. Marcus had learned about these phenomena not through formal education, but through practical experience in his family's small bakery business. His uncle had suffered severe burns in a flour dust explosion during the 1930s, an accident that had taught the entire family to respect the dangerous potential of what most people considered a harmless ingredient. The young man understood that flour particles, when suspended in air at proper concentrations, created an explosive mixture far more powerful than most people realized. The tactical problem represented by the Tiger tank began to merge in Marcus's mind with his understanding of improvised explosives. The German vehicle was operating at relatively close range, perhaps 800 meters from the American defensive positions, close enough that an explosive device of sufficient power might be able to damage its track system or other vulnerable components. The challenge lay in delivering such a device to the target and ensuring that it detonated at the optimal moment. Standard military doctrine offered few solutions for Marcus's circumstances. He was a cook, not a demolitions expert, and his access to conventional explosives was essentially non-existent. Infantry anti-tank weapons available to the battalion were ineffective against Tiger frontal armor at current engagement ranges. Artillery support was available but limited, and the enemy tank's mobility made it a difficult target for indirect fire weapons. But unconventional problems sometimes demanded unconventional solutions, and Marcus Washington was beginning to formulate a plan that would have seemed impossible to anyone who didn't understand both the chemistry of flower explosions and the tactical requirements of the current situation. His idea centered on creating what amounted to a massive flower bomb, using ingredients readily available in his field kitchen, then delivering it to the Tiger tank through means that would bypass the vehicle's formidable defensive capabilities. The first component of his plan involved creating a flower dust cloud of sufficient density to produce a powerful explosion when ignited. This required not just large quantities of flour, but also a delivery mechanism that would disperse the material evenly and rapidly across a significant area. Marcus realized that his field kitchen equipment included several large pots that could be modified for this purpose, along with compressed air systems used for cleaning that could provide the necessary dispersal pressure. The second component involved timing the explosion to maximize damage to the target while avoiding harm to friendly forces. This was perhaps the most challenging aspect of the plan, requiring coordination with the Tiger tank's movement patterns and the ability to trigger detonation at precisely the right moment. Marcus would need to observe the enemy vehicle's behavior carefully, identifying patterns that would allow him to predict its position with reasonable accuracy. The third component centered on the delivery mechanism itself. The Tiger tank was maintaining position approximately 800 meters away, well beyond the effective range of anything Marcus could throw by hand. He would need to find a way to place his improvised explosive device close enough to the target to achieve the desired effect, while avoiding detection by the German crew, who would certainly respond to any obvious threats with their 88mm main gun. As these ideas crystallized in Marcus's mind, the tactical situation continued to evolve around him. Radio reports indicated that the German probe was intensifying, with additional enemy forces identified moving through the forest. American casualties were mounting, though specific numbers remained unclear. Most significantly, the Tiger tank had shifted position twice, moving closer to the American lines, while maintaining its tactical advantage through superior armor and firepower. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison returned to the field kitchen area around 9 in the morning, his uniform showing the effects of crawling between defensive positions under enemy fire. His expression reflected the kind of controlled concern that experienced commanders developed when facing serious threats with limited options. The battalion was holding its positions, but the German pressure was mounting and something needed to change soon. "Washington, I need you to pack up everything that's portable and be ready to displace on 5 minutes' notice," Morrison ordered. "This situation might require us to fall back to secondary positions, and I can't afford to lose our cooking capability." Marcus looked up from his work, flour still coating his hands and forearms. "Colonel, before we move, I might have an idea about that tank problem." Morrison paused, studying the young cook's expression. In his experience, good ideas could come from unexpected sources, and desperate situations sometimes required unconventional solutions. "What kind of idea?" "Well, sir, I've been thinking about that Tiger tank out there, and I believe I might be able to put it out of action using materials I have right here in the kitchen." The colonel's initial reaction was skeptical. It seemed impossible that a field cook could accomplish what trained tank crews with specialized equipment had failed to achieve. But something in Marcus's tone suggested this was not the product of wishful thinking or inexperience. Morrison had learned to trust his instincts about people, and those instincts told him to listen carefully. "Explain what you have in mind," Morrison said, settling down beside the field kitchen where their conversation could remain private. Marcus began outlining his plan, describing how flour dust could create powerful explosions under the right conditions, how his kitchen equipment could be modified to create and disperse such a mixture, and how the resulting device might be delivered to the target. He spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who understood the scientific principles involved, backing up his theoretical knowledge with practical examples from industrial accidents and agricultural disasters. The colonel listened with growing amazement as Marcus detailed his proposed approach. The plan was undeniably dangerous, requiring the young cook to move to within a few hundred meters of the enemy tank while carrying an improvised explosive device that could easily detonate prematurely. Success would depend on perfect timing, favorable wind conditions, and the German crew's failure to detect the threat until too late. Failure would almost certainly result in Marcus's death, along with the destruction of valuable equipment. But the plan also possessed certain advantages that conventional approaches lacked. The Tiger crew would not be expecting an attack from this direction, particularly one that relied on improvised explosives rather than standard anti-tank weapons. The flour bomb would create effects that German armor was simply not designed to withstand, while the tank's steel plating could deflect projectiles and absorb explosive impacts. It provided no protection against the kind of overpressure wave that a properly executed flour explosion would generate. Morrison found himself weighing factors that had never appeared in any military manual he had studied. The tactical situation was deteriorating, conventional solutions had proven ineffective, and time was running short. His battalion needed a breakthrough, something that would shift the momentum in their favor and potentially open opportunities for follow-on actions. Marcus's plan offered the possibility of eliminating the most serious threat they faced, while requiring resources that were readily available and personnel who were willing to accept the risks involved. "How confident are you that this will work?" Morrison asked finally. Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. "Colonel, I understand the science involved, and I believe the basic concept is sound. But there are variables I can't control: wind direction, the exact timing of the explosion, whether the German crew will detect what I'm doing before it's too late. I'd say we have maybe a 50-50 chance of success, but those might be better odds than anything else we're facing right now." The colonel nodded slowly, his mind working through the implications and alternatives. Standard military procedure would be to request artillery support, call for airstrikes, or attempt to coordinate a flanking attack using his remaining Sherman tanks. All of these approaches had been tried or considered, and all faced significant limitations given the current tactical situation. Marcus's plan represented something entirely different, an approach so unconventional that it might succeed precisely because no one would expect it. "What do you need from me?" Morrison asked. "Time to prepare the device, sir, and maybe a distraction to keep that Tiger crew focused on something other than what I'll be doing. If you can coordinate some kind of demonstration with our tanks, something that will draw their attention to the main defensive line, it should give me the opportunity I need to get close enough." Morrison stood, his decision made. "You have 1 hour to get ready. I'll coordinate with the tank platoons to provide the distraction you need. Washington, if you pull this off, you'll have earned more than just a commendation. You'll have saved a lot of lives and probably changed the outcome of this entire engagement." The young cook nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility that had just been placed on his shoulders. He had 1 hour to transform his theoretical understanding of flour explosions into a working weapon capable of disabling one of the most formidable tanks ever built. The margin for error was essentially non-existent, and failure would likely result in his death, along with continued casualties among his fellow soldiers. Marcus began his preparations immediately, starting with the creation of what would become the largest flour bomb ever attempted in combat conditions. He selected 2 of his largest cooking pots, each capable of holding 15 gallons, and began modifying them to serve as the primary components of his improvised weapon. The first pot would contain the flour mixture itself, while the second would house the dispersal mechanism and triggering system. The flour preparation required careful attention to particle size and moisture content. Marcus sifted nearly 50 pounds of flour through fine mesh screens, removing any lumps or foreign materials that might interfere with even distribution. The goal was to create a powder so fine that it would remain suspended in air long enough to achieve the critical concentration needed for explosive combustion. Too coarse, and the particles would settle too quickly. Too fine, and they might clump together rather than dispersing properly. He also needed to consider the ignition system that would trigger the explosion at the optimal moment. Standard military flares were available, but their timing was imprecise and their reliability questionable under field conditions. Instead, Marcus decided to create a simple but effective ignition source using materials from his cooking supplies. A combination of magnesium powder scraped from emergency fire-starting tablets and potassium permanganate from the medical kit would create a chemical reaction hot enough to ignite the flour cloud instantly. The dispersal mechanism presented the most complex technical challenge. Marcus needed to create enough air pressure to distribute 50 pounds of flour evenly across a significant area, while ensuring that the system would function reliably under combat conditions. His solution involved using compressed air canisters from the field kitchen's cleaning equipment, connected to the flour container through a system of pipes and valves that would allow precise control over the dispersal rate and pattern. As he worked, Marcus remained constantly aware of the tactical situation developing around him. Radio reports indicated that the Tiger tank had moved again, this time advancing to within 600 meters of the American defensive line. German infantry had been spotted moving through the forest, apparently preparing for a coordinated assault that would use the tank as a spearhead. The window of opportunity for Marcus's plan was rapidly closing. The young cook's hands moved with practiced efficiency as he assembled his improvised weapon. Years of working in commercial kitchens had taught him to function effectively under pressure, to maintain attention to detail even when time was running short, and to improvise solutions using whatever materials were available. These skills proved invaluable as he combined cooking equipment, cleaning supplies, and emergency materials into something that had never been attempted before. The final assembly process required careful integration of all the system components. The flour container needed to be positioned so that its contents would disperse in the optimal pattern when triggered. The ignition system had to be reliable, but delayed enough to allow Marcus to reach a safe distance before detonation. Most critically, the entire device needed to be portable enough for one man to carry across several hundred meters of rough terrain without detection. Marcus's solution involved creating what amounted to a large backpack system, with the flour container and dispersal mechanism distributed between two separate units connected by flexible tubing. This configuration would allow him to maintain better balance while moving, while also providing redundancy in case one component failed during transport. The ignition system incorporated a simple timer mechanism created from a modified alarm clock, giving him exactly 5 minutes to reach safety after activation. By 10:30 in the morning, Marcus had completed his preparations and was ready to attempt what military historians would later describe as one of the most audacious improvised attacks in the history of warfare. His device consisted of 50 pounds of carefully prepared flour, a compressed air dispersal system capable of creating a cloud approximately 30 meters in diameter, and an ignition system designed to trigger the explosion at the optimal moment for maximum effect. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison appeared at the field kitchen for a final coordination briefing, bringing with him detailed information about the current enemy dispositions and the planned diversion that would support Marcus's approach. The Tiger tank had settled into a position approximately 500 meters from the American line, using a small rise in the terrain to maximize its fields of fire while maintaining protection for its more vulnerable rear aspects. The tank platoons will begin their demonstration at exactly 1100 hours, Morrison explained. They'll engage from maximum range, not expecting to achieve any significant results, but hopefully drawing the German crew's attention away from your approach route. You'll have approximately 15 minutes of distraction before they realize what we're trying to accomplish. Marcus nodded, studying the hand-drawn map that showed his planned route of approach. The path would take him through a series of drainage ditches and small depressions, providing concealment from the Tiger crew while allowing him to reach a position close enough for his weapon to be effective. The final approach would require him to cross approximately 100 meters of open ground, during which detection would mean almost certain death. "Once I trigger the device, how long before I need to be clear?" Marcus asked. "The timer gives you 5 minutes, but I'd recommend assuming less. These flour explosions can be unpredictable, and you don't want to be anywhere nearby when it goes off. Plan on covering at least 200 meters in 4 minutes, Then find something solid to get behind. The young cook adjusted the straps on his improvised backpack system, distributing the weight evenly across his shoulders and hips. The device was heavier than he had anticipated, probably close to 80 pounds, including all components, but still manageable for someone in good physical condition. He had tested the system's balance and mobility during his preparation time, ensuring that he could move effectively while carrying the full load. Morrison extended his hand, and Marcus shook it firmly. "Whatever happens out there, Washington, you've already proven something important today. You've shown that good ideas can come from unexpected places, and that sometimes the most powerful weapons are the ones nobody sees coming." At 1100 hours precisely, the American Sherman tanks began their coordinated demonstration, engaging the Tiger with long-range fire that had little chance of penetrating its armor, but succeeded in capturing the German crew's complete attention. The Tiger responded immediately, its 88mm gun booming as it returned fire at the clearly visible threats along the defensive line. Radio chatter increased dramatically as both sides maneuvered for advantage in what appeared to be a conventional tank engagement. Marcus used this distraction to begin his approach, moving carefully through the concealed route he had planned. The weight of his improvised weapon made movement more difficult than anticipated, and he quickly discovered that maintaining both speed and stealth while carrying 80 pounds of equipment required constant attention to balance and footing. The drainage ditches provided excellent concealment, but were filled with standing water that soaked through his boots and made every step uncertain. The sound of tank guns continued to echo across the valley as Marcus worked his way closer to his target. Through occasional glimpses between his concealment and the German position, he could see the Tiger tank's turret traversing slowly as its crew engaged different American positions. The massive vehicle appeared even more formidable at close range, its thick armor plates and powerful main gun representing the culmination of German military engineering. After 20 minutes of careful movement, Marcus reached the point where he would have to leave concealment for his final approach. The Tiger tank sat approximately 150 meters away, its crew still focused on the American tanks that continued to engage them from the defensive line. This was the moment when success or failure would be determined. Once he left the drainage system, he would be committed to completing his mission regardless of the consequences. Marcus checked his equipment one final time, ensuring that all connections were secure and that the timer mechanism was properly armed. The ignition system showed green indicators for all components, suggesting that the device would function as designed when activated. He took several deep breaths, mentally rehearsing the movements he would need to execute over the next few minutes, then began his sprint toward the German tank. The final approach required Marcus to cross open ground while carrying his improvised weapon, moving fast enough to avoid detection, but carefully enough to prevent damage to the delicate dispersal system. His route took him through a series of shell craters and natural depressions that provided brief moments of concealment, but the majority of the distance had to be covered in full view of anyone who might be looking in his direction. Fortune favored Marcus during these critical minutes, as the Tiger crew remained completely focused on the American tanks that continued to engage them from long range. The German commander appeared to be coordinating a tactical movement designed to improve his unit's firing position, requiring his complete attention for radio communications and terrain analysis. None of the crew members thought to scan for threats approaching from an unexpected direction. Marcus reached his optimal firing position approximately 75 meters from the Tiger tank, close enough for his flower bomb to be highly effective, but far enough away to provide some chance of survival when the device detonated. He positioned the flower container carefully, ensuring that the dispersal pattern would center on the German vehicle, then activated the timer mechanism that would trigger the explosion in exactly 5 minutes. The young cook immediately began his withdrawal, moving as quickly as possible while trying to avoid detection by the German crew. His escape route took him through the same terrain features he had used during his approach, but this time, speed was more important than concealment. He had less than 5 minutes to reach minimum safe distance, and every second of delay increased his risk of being caught in the explosion he had created. As Marcus ran, he could hear the continuing tank engagement behind him. the sound of main guns firing and shells impacting, providing a strange counterpoint to his desperate flight towards safety. The timer in his head counted down the remaining seconds as he covered ground with the kind of speed that only comes from knowing that death is following close behind. 4 minutes, 3.5 minutes, 3 minutes. At exactly 2 minutes and 30 seconds after activation, Marcus reached what he hoped would be adequate shelter behind a concrete drainage culvert approximately 200 meters from the Tiger tank. He pressed himself against the structure's base, covering his head with his hands and opening his mouth to equalize pressure as his grandmother had taught him to do during thunderstorms. The final countdown seemed to stretch endlessly as he waited for the explosion that would determine whether his impossible plan had succeeded or failed. The detonation, when it came, exceeded even Marcus's expectations for its power and effects. The 50 pounds of flour had dispersed perfectly in the still morning air, creating a cloud of explosive particles that covered nearly 40 meters in diameter when the ignition system triggered. The resulting explosion generated a pressure wave that could be felt over a kilometer away, accompanied by a column of flame that rose nearly 100 meters into the air. The Tiger tank, positioned at the center of this improvised inferno, absorbed the full force of an explosion equivalent to several hundred pounds of conventional explosives. While its armor remained intact, the overpressure wave penetrated every opening in the vehicle, vision ports, ventilation systems, and the space around the turret ring. The German crew was instantly incapacitated, not by the flame itself, but by the pressure effects and oxygen depletion that accompanied the flour explosion. More significantly, the explosion's effects extended beyond the immediate crew casualties. The intense heat warped several of the tank's track pins, effectively immobilizing the vehicle even though its main systems remained functional. Electrical connections throughout the tank were disrupted by the pressure wave, leaving multiple systems inoperative. Most critically, the explosion had been so unexpected and so unlike anything in the German crew's experience that it created a psychological impact that extended far beyond the immediate physical damage. Marcus felt the pressure wave wash over his position with crushing force, even at his distance from the explosion. The concrete culvert that sheltered him cracked along its length as the overpressure passed, and debris rained down for nearly a minute afterward. When he finally raised his head to assess the results of his attack, he saw a scene that exceeded his wildest expectations for success. The Tiger tank sat motionless in the center of a blackened circle where the explosion had occurred. Smoke rose from several points around the vehicle, and there was no sign of movement from the crew. More importantly, American tanks were already moving forward from their defensive positions, recognizing that the primary threat to their advance had been eliminated. The German probe that had seemed so dangerous an hour earlier was rapidly collapsing as supporting forces withdrew in the face of this completely unexpected development. Radio communications erupted with reports and questions as word of the explosion spread throughout the American forces. No one had been expecting anything like what they had just witnessed, and initial reports suggested everything from a direct artillery hit to some kind of new secret weapon. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, monitoring the situation from his command post, recognized immediately what had actually occurred and felt a mixture of amazement and professional admiration for what his young cook had accomplished. Marcus began his return journey to friendly lines, moving carefully through terrain that had been transformed by the explosion. The ground around the destroyed Tiger showed the characteristic signs of a flour explosion, a circular pattern of burnt earth with relatively little cratering, evidence of the unique properties of his improvised weapon. As he walked, the young man found himself thinking about his grandmother's lessons and how knowledge gained in one context could prove valuable in completely unexpected circumstances. The immediate tactical situation had been completely transformed by the elimination of the Tiger tank. German forces that had been preparing to exploit the armored spearhead found themselves facing aggressive American advances, supported by tanks that no longer needed to fear the 88mm gun. The probe that had threatened to become a serious penetration of Allied lines collapsed within hours, with most German forces withdrawing to prepared positions several kilometers to the east. When Marcus finally reached American lines, he found himself the center of attention from officers and enlisted men who were still trying to understand exactly what had happened. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison was among the first to greet him, his expression reflecting both relief at the young cook's survival and amazement at what had been accomplished. The improvised weapon had not only succeeded beyond expectations, but had done so in a way that would influence military thinking for decades to come. "Washington, I need you to explain to higher headquarters exactly how you did what you just did," Morrison said. "This is going to generate interest all the way up to division level and probably beyond. You may have just invented a new category of improvised weapons." The young cook nodded, understanding that his actions would require detailed documentation and analysis. Military organizations were always interested in successful innovations, particularly those that could be replicated using readily available materials. The flour bomb represented a completely new approach to anti-tank warfare, one that bypassed traditional armor protection through unconventional means. Over the following hours, Marcus found himself providing detailed briefings to a succession of intelligence officers, weapons specialists, and senior commanders who had arrived to investigate the unprecedented attack. His explanation of the scientific principles involved, combined with his practical demonstration of how the device had been constructed, provided valuable insights into potential applications for similar techniques. The intelligence value of the intact Tiger tank also proved significant. While the vehicle's crew had been incapacitated, the tank itself remained largely undamaged and provided Allied forces with detailed information about German armor capabilities. Technical specialists were able to examine everything from armor composition to fire control systems, intelligence that would prove valuable in future engagements. But perhaps the most important impact of Marcus's improvised attack was psychological rather than tactical. Word of the incident spread rapidly through both American and German forces, creating a legend that would influence morale and tactical thinking on both sides. For American forces, it demonstrated that innovation and determination could overcome seemingly impossible odds. For German forces, it introduced an element of uncertainty about threats that might come from completely unexpected directions. The young cook's actions also contributed to broader changes in military doctrine regarding unconventional warfare and the potential value of improvised weapons. Previous military thinking had focused primarily on standardized equipment and conventional tactics, but Marcus's success demonstrated that creative individuals with practical knowledge could achieve results that traditional approaches could not match. In the weeks following the incident, Marcus found himself temporarily reassigned to work with military engineers and weapons specialists who were investigating the potential for developing his flour bomb concept into a standardized weapon system. These efforts ultimately proved unsuccessful, as the device required too many variables to align perfectly for reliable military use. However, the principles involved influenced the development of other unconventional weapons and tactics that would prove valuable in later conflicts. The immediate recognition of Marcus's achievement came in the form of military decorations and commendations that acknowledged both his personal courage and the innovative nature of his solution. But the young man understood that the real significance of what had happened went beyond individual recognition to demonstrate broader principles about the value of practical knowledge and creative thinking in military situations. As winter turned to spring across Belgium, the 761st Tank Battalion continued its advance toward Germany, participating in the final campaigns that would bring the European conflict to an end. Marcus returned to his duties as a cook, but his reputation as the man who had destroyed a Tiger tank with flour preceded him wherever the unit went. New personnel would often seek him out, hoping to hear the story firsthand, or to learn some of the practical skills that had made such an impossible achievement possible. The broader war continued its inexorable progression toward Allied victory, but individual incidents like Marcus's flour bomb attack contributed to the psychological pressure that was undermining German resistance. Each demonstration of American innovation and determination reinforced the growing realization among German forces that they were facing opponents who possessed not just superior numbers and equipment, but also the creativity and individual initiative needed to find solutions to any problem. Marcus himself remained characteristically modest about his achievement, understanding that success had required not just his own knowledge and courage, but also the support and distraction provided by his fellow soldiers. He recognized that military effectiveness depended on teamwork and coordination, with individual contributions gaining significance through their integration with larger unit capabilities. The technical aspects of the flour bomb attack continued to generate interest and analysis long after the immediate tactical situation had been resolved. Military engineers studied the dispersal patterns, chemical specialists examined the combustion characteristics, and tactical analysts evaluated the broader implications for anti-armor warfare. These studies contributed to a growing understanding of unconventional weapons and their potential applications. But the human elements of the story resonated even more powerfully than the technical details. Marcus Washington had demonstrated that extraordinary achievements could come from unexpected sources. That practical knowledge gained in civilian life could prove invaluable in military situations, and that individual initiative could make a decisive difference in the outcome of larger engagements. The young cook's background as an African-American soldier in a segregated military added additional layers of significance to his achievement. At a time when many questioned the capabilities and contributions of minority service members, Marcus had proven that excellence could come from any source, and that artificial barriers based on race or background ultimately weakened rather than strengthened military effectiveness. As the European conflict drew toward its conclusion, Marcus began thinking about his future after the war. His experience had opened doors and created opportunities that would not have existed before his moment of innovation and courage. Military officials had suggested possibilities for advanced education in engineering or chemistry, while civilian employers had expressed interest in his practical problem-solving abilities. The flour bomb incident had also attracted attention from unexpected quarters, including industrial safety specialists who recognized the relevance of Marcus's knowledge to preventing accidental explosions in grain processing facilities. His understanding of how flour particles behaved under different conditions could contribute to improving safety measures in agricultural and food processing industries. But whatever direction his post-war life might take, Marcus understood that his experience in Belgium had fundamentally changed how he thought about problems and solutions. The successful attack on the Tiger tank had demonstrated that creative thinking could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles, that unconventional approaches sometimes worked where traditional methods failed, and that individual knowledge and initiative could make extraordinary achievements possible. The broader military and strategic implications of the flour bomb attack continued to influence thinking long after the immediate tactical situation had been resolved. Military academies incorporated the incident into their curricula as an example of innovative thinking under pressure. Intelligence services studied the psychological effects of unconventional attacks on enemy morale and decision-making processes. Most significantly, the attack demonstrated principles that would prove relevant far beyond World War II. Future conflicts would see increasing emphasis on unconventional warfare, improvised weapons, and the ability to find creative solutions using available materials. Marcus Washington's flour bomb had provided an early example of how these approaches could achieve strategic effects through tactical innovations. The German forces in Belgium never fully recovered from the psychological impact of losing a Tiger tank to what appeared to be an impossible attack. Unit histories from the period reflect increasing concern about threats that might come from unexpected directions, leading to tactical changes that diverted resources from offensive operations to defensive measures against unconventional attacks that might never materialize. American forces, conversely, gained confidence from seeing that their individual soldiers could achieve extraordinary results through initiative and creativity. This psychological advantage contributed to the aggressive spirit that characterized Allied operations during the final months of the European campaign, as troops understood that they possessed not just material superiority, but also the human qualities needed to exploit any opportunity. The story of Marcus Washington's flour bomb attack spread through military and civilian channels, becoming part of the larger narrative about American resourcefulness and determination during World War II. It joined other stories of individual achievement and innovation that helped define the generation that fought the war, demonstrating that victory required not just industrial capacity and strategic planning, but also the contributions of individuals who could see possibilities where others saw only problems. As the conflict in Europe finally ended in May 1945, Marcus found himself looking back on the previous months with a mixture of pride and amazement at what had been accomplished. His improvised attack on the Tiger tank had lasted only minutes, but its effects had rippled outward to influence tactical situations, strategic thinking, and individual morale in ways that continued long after the immediate danger had passed. The young cook had entered military service expecting to spend the war preparing meals and supporting combat operations from behind the lines. Instead, he had found himself at the center of one of the most innovative and audacious attacks in military history, demonstrating that extraordinary achievements could come from the most unexpected sources. His grandmother's lessons about flour and chemistry had proven more valuable than the most sophisticated military training. In the decades that followed, military historians would analyze the flour bomb attack as an early example of asymmetric warfare, demonstrating how unconventional approaches could neutralize superior conventional weapons. The incident became a case study in innovation under pressure, individual initiative in military operations, and the value of practical knowledge in solving complex problems. But for Marcus Washington himself, the most important lessons were personal rather than professional. He had learned that knowledge gained in one context could prove valuable in completely different circumstances, that creative thinking could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles, and that individual courage could make a decisive difference in the outcome of larger events. These insights would guide his approach to challenges throughout his post-war life. The technical details of how an 18-year-old cook had destroyed a Tiger tank using flour continued to fascinate specialists in multiple fields. The incident contributed to improved understanding of dust explosions, enhanced safety measures in industrial facilities, and new approaches to unconventional weapons development. But the human elements of the story, the courage, creativity, and determination that had made the achievement possible, resonated even more powerfully across the years. Marcus's story also highlighted the often overlooked contributions of support personnel in military operations. While combat troops received most of the attention and recognition, the war effort depended on thousands of individuals like Marcus who performed essential but unglamorous duties. His moment of extraordinary achievement demonstrated that every member of a military organization possessed the potential to make decisive contributions when circumstances required. The racial dimensions of the story added additional significance to Marcus's achievement. As an African-American soldier serving in a segregated military, he had faced prejudice and limited opportunities throughout his service. His success in destroying the Tiger tank provided clear evidence that excellence could come from any source, helping to challenge assumptions and open doors for future generations of minority service members. The broader strategic context of the flour bomb attack reflected the changing nature of warfare itself during World War II. The conflict had seen unprecedented innovation in weapons, tactics, and technology, with success often going to forces that could adapt most quickly to changing circumstances. Marcus's improvised weapon represented an extreme example of this adaptive capability, showing how individual creativity could produce effects that conventional weapons could not achieve. As the story of the flour bomb attack spread through military and civilian channels after the war, it became part of a larger narrative about American ingenuity and determination. The incident joined other examples of individual achievement and innovation that helped define the World War II generation, demonstrating that victory required not just industrial capacity and strategic planning, but also the contributions of ordinary people who could accomplish extraordinary things when circumstances demanded. The impact of Marcus's achievement extended beyond its immediate tactical and strategic effects to influence thinking about human potential and the value of diverse perspectives in solving complex problems. His success demonstrated that breakthrough solutions could come from unexpected sources, that practical knowledge was often more valuable than theoretical training, and that individual initiative could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The flour bomb incident also contributed to changing attitudes about innovation and unconventional thinking in military organizations. Previous approaches had emphasized standardization and conventional tactics, But Marcus's success showed that creative individuals could achieve results that traditional methods could not match. This recognition led to increased interest in promoting innovation and supporting individual initiative throughout military structures. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.